I lived in California for almost 10 years of my life, and I actually ended up moving to Norway. Now, something I always would remember about US houses is how every single home had a huge fridge. That was the norm. But since coming to Norway, what intrigued me the most was how small the fridges were. It was almost half the size of a typical US fridge. It was one of the first moments I realized how differently people live here. So these are some of the everyday things in Norway that make no sense to Americans. At first I really couldn't figure it out because in the US we're always buying groceries for the next week, for the current week. We're just always buying in bulk. We fill our shelves with leftovers, all these different foods, right? But in Norway, people shop completely differently. They're not buying stuff for the next week or for the week after that. They're buying things for the next day, next couple of days. And I somehow was surprised to figure out all these things still fit in a tiny fridge. Even though it's half the size, it still fits everything inside. And I realized that this is actually a better way of living because one, you're going to buy food that you're going to eat, nothing goes to waste. You're intentionally buying the stuff and it just saves you money. It saves you wasting food because wasting food is a big issue, around the world. So I think the tiny fridges didn't make sense at first, but when I realized that people are intentionally shopping, it made a lot of sense. It was like, okay, this is a smart thing to use for shopping. And then the next thing I want to talk about is alcohol. Now, this one is super interesting for a lot of you Americans watching, if you're American or anyone else watching, because in the US, you can buy alcohol whenever you want, right? Whatever time, whatever day. But in Norway, this is very different. So I'm going to talk about a couple things. And the first thing being, you cannot buy alcohol on Sundays. So on Sundays, it is not allowed, cannot buy it at all, no matter what time it is. And that was very interesting to me because I did not know you can't buy alcohol on Sundays. And honestly, I'm not really sure why that is, but it was definitely very interesting to learn. And the next thing is you cannot buy alcohol after 8 p.m. on the weekdays. Now, funny story, I was actually going to the store to purchase some and the time was 7:59 p.m., right? 7:59 p.m. And I was walking to check out. I was scanning the item, right? I was about to buy it. The clock hit 8 o'clock. And when you buy alcohol, they have to come and check your ID to make sure you're allowed to buy it. And they said, oh no, you can't because it's 8 o'clock. And I was just like, wow, that is very strict and very fast. Right as it hit 8, couldn't buy it, even though I was in the process of buying it. That's another major rule is you cannot buy it past 8 on the weekdays. And then on the weekends, you cannot buy it past, which is so early. It's like, do you expect me to buy it, in the morning or in the day? So those were very confusing and interesting to me, coming from America. And then the next thing, in the grocery stores, they sell, your normal beverages. But then if you want anything stronger than wine, you do have to go to the government-run store for that. And then the last thing I want to mention is to buy anything up to 22%, you must be 18 years old. And then if you do want anything stronger than 22%, you have to be 20 years old. So I had never heard of that before coming to Norway, and that was very interesting to me because I never heard of specific ages for percent of alcohol, right? That does not exist in the US. In the US, you have to be 21 to buy any type of alcohol. You cannot be younger than that. So then the next thing I want to talk about is laundry. Now, in the US, and what I would used to do is basically just take my clothes, throw it in the washer, dry it, nothing to worry about, no problem. But something I've noticed, not just in Norway, but across Europe, is drying racks. And I remember this very well. The first time I came to Norway, I actually stayed in an Airbnb. I was gonna go dry my clothes and wash them, right? Like I did in the US. But then I was met with no dryer. And at first I was very confused. I was like, is this a problem? Maybe this place doesn't have a dryer. And then no, I actually learned that in Norway and across Europe, they use drying racks. So what they'll do is they'll take their clothes, they'll wash it, then they'll take out this drying rack, place the clothes on top and let it air dry, right? And at first, I didn't understand why they did it. I was like, what is the point in this? But then after actually doing it, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty smart. One, you save on electricity. You don't have to buy a dryer. It's just easier, right? You don't have to use all these powders and chemicals. You just dry it and it's done. And it's efficient, right? Even though it does take a while, it works equally as well as a dryer, maybe even better, because if it's really hot outside, dries very quickly. I mean, maybe in the winter you do that inside, you just have your drying rack and then you'll dry it overnight. But I thought this was not common, but in Europe, everyone does it. I remember even going to different European countries and seeing people drying it on their balconies or hanging it off their balcony. I was like, wow, that is just so interesting, right? You don't see that in a lot of places in the world, especially in the US. Everyone uses a dryer. I thought that was so interesting to learn. And it also reminded me that everything doesn't have to be instant. It's okay for things to take time. Another thing that really caught me off guard was no cash. And now thinking about it, I have not touched a single bill or coin since coming to Norway, and I've been here for 6 months. Now that is absolutely mind-blowing because in the US, it's pretty common for everyone to have some dollars in their wallet, their pocket, a couple quarters if you need to do your laundry or, buy a ticket for a train, whatever you need to do. People always carry cash as an emergency. But in Norway, I have never seen that. To buy a train ticket, bus ticket, tram ticket, coffee, all on your phone. Everything's on your phone, which is so efficient because, with cash and with quarters, it's very easy to lose and you got to keep track of it. And it's just like, I'm a person that loses stuff very easily. So I know cash would not be a good idea because I would definitely lose that. So I think it's great to be able to use it all on my phone. And it just makes life a lot simpler, even for the people working, right? Because you don't need to exchange the bills for all the currency. You got to count to make sure you get the right amount. No, people just use their phone to pay. This is small, but I think it says a lot about how Norway works and how people trust each other a lot to not do the wrong thing. They trust each other. And the last thing that really surprised me as an American is no air conditioning. Because when I used to live in the US, air conditioning was so common. Almost every hotel, house, school, restaurant always had it. Every home had it. And I remember immediately when it would be hot in California, I would turn on the air conditioning. Within a second, it would be on. But since coming to Norway, I have definitely experienced the exact opposite because in Norway and across Europe, people do not use air conditioning. Now, there's a number of reasons for this. The first one being it does cost a lot of money and Norwegians like to conserve energy and not spend lots of money because, as you know, air conditioning can be expensive to run and it's also not good for the environment. So environmental reasoning and cost reasoning is the first reason why. Now, the next reason being there's no need for it, right? Because a lot of Norwegians open their windows, right? Why wouldn't you when you have such fresh, clean air that can feel so good, especially when it's hot outside, you get that cool air coming in. It just feels a lot better. And it basically is the same thing as AC. Maybe not as cold, but it's pretty close. So there is no need for AC. And the last reason being buildings in Norway are actually built to trap heat, which is great for the cold months in the winter because then you're extra warm. You don't need to worry about freezing. You're going to trap all the heat inside. But then when it starts to become summer, that is not ideal because then you're going to burn up. So instead of installing AC and paying extra money for electricity and spending the money to install it, Norwegians prefer to just open their windows, even buy some fans, for a couple days because it doesn't stay that hot here, especially, since how far north Norway is. You're not going to be in extreme times of heat for long periods of time, not like California where it can get very hot for a couple weeks or even a month. No, in Norway, it's just easier to buy a one-time fan or a fan, which is way cheaper than AC. Use it in the couple days it's hot, maybe week, 5 days. That's the reason why I guess AC is not common in Europe, and now it makes a ton of sense to me. But I want to also include one story in this point because this was very funny. I remember in the summer when I came to Norway, it was super hot for a couple days. And since there is no AC, I was definitely feeling it, especially coming from California where AC is very common. Didn't have that here. So I remember trying to go to a store to purchase a fan, but all of them were sold out. As I was saying, Norwegians will just go and buy every single fan because it's easier than buying AC. So I realized I got to be quick to get my fans because literally everything was sold out. So that's when I learned, got to be on that. So that's a quick story I want to mention because I thought it was pretty funny. The longer I've lived here, I've realized maybe this stuff isn't random. Maybe it's intentional because life here isn't about convenience, it's about balance. And I think when you have all these things instilled in your life, it creates a much calmer, balanced, more relaxed life. And I remember coming here as an American and not really understanding why Norway does this. But after I experienced it and learned it, I realized, wow, this really does improve the quality of your life. And it is amazing that a country like this offers things that you never would have expected to change your life for the better. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of the video. Subscribe because we have many more videos coming on the way. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Nicolas signing off. Peace. Ooh.